Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the lunch break. Now, let's look into the next session of this afternoon. With revised renewable ambitions for 2030, corporate renewable energy procurement has to play a much bigger role in supporting our member states, our countries, in achieving higher renewable targets and deploying even more renewable sources. Corporate renewable procurements can help complementing usefully the contributions which are made by member states through existing public tendering schemes and support. Solar in itself has become the most competitive energy source in history. It is therefore also becoming a key driver to support the competitiveness of our industries through interesting business models such as renewable corporate procurement or on-site self-consumption. The upcoming Fit for 55 package will be a unique opportunity to drive even further these exciting business models. It will help us enable them further in order to have them taking their full part in the European energy transition. To cover this very exciting topic, and without further ado, I am super delighted to hand over to our CEO, Valborga Hemmetsberger, who will walk you through the next session on Solar4Businesses. Valborga, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Oli, for the introduction. Hello to everyone. Welcome also from my side. Dear ladies, dear gentlemen, dear distinguished panel, the race is on. It is really about the big global economies who are putting a lot of emphasis on spurring their green economies. This is obviously great for combating climate change. But and by the way, we also hope to see some more engagement in COP26 this year. But we also want to turn it into an opportunity for European businesses. This session is about to discuss about how we can achieve it and how we can turn this challenge into an opportunity for businesses, and how to support them best, obviously. And before I'm introducing the distinguished panel, let me first turn to Dieter Juul-Jørgensen, Director General of DG Energy in the European Commission. Welcome, Dieter. DG Energy is working at full speed, Aurélie already alluded to it, at really turning the climate ambitions Europe has, and we finally have the climate law, into the next steps. So we understand that you will be coming up with the Fit for 55 package still before the summer. And businesses, as you know, play really a major role in turning this energy transition into a success. Our forecast shows that when it comes to PV installed capacity, the capacities could reach somewhere around 250 gigawatt for the commercial sector, and even more, 300 gigawatt for the industrial sector. And to put that into perspective, we are at 140 roundabout gigawatt installed in Europe today. We as SolarPower Europe identified a couple of barriers why this is not taking place yet, and why it is that we're not unleashing this potential yet. Because it can play a major role. So what holds them back? Do we need to get one step further, apart from barriers, to incentivize businesses to play their role? And all of that is just to ask you, Dieter Juul-Jørgensen, to give us a little bit of a sneak preview, if you can, on what you're working on and what the role of businesses is in this work you're doing. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Valborga, for the introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation to join you today. I'm really happy to be here, and would be happy to say a few words about where do we stand with the European Green Deal, and the important role of solar power, photovoltaic in the clean energy transition. And then I would also give you an update on where we are on Fit for 55, the package of proposals scheduled for later this year, and say something about recovery and resilience and the national recovery and resilience plans. And then maybe just a very brief word on the industrial strategy, the updated industrial strategy that was adopted just last week. And all of this in just 10 minutes, so I will launch straight into it. Now, first of all, the European Green Deal, as you will recall, the von der Leyen Commission has really set the European Green Deal, climate neutrality in 2050, as a key focus point of this term. and published the European Green Deal as a roadmap on how to achieve climate neutrality in 2050. And this happened just 2 weeks after the Commission started, and has really been our work plan since then, and in particular in DG Energy. Because it's clear that the renewable energy sector will have a key role to play in this transition to carbon neutrality by 2050, and solar power, of course, in particular. What we're going to need to see is a doubling of deployment by 2030 compared to today, and then a tripling by 2050. And of course, the European Green Deal goes beyond the energy sector, beyond solar energy, and really aims to bring together all of our policy instruments, all of our sectoral policies, energy, transport, health, taxation, education, defense, to help work in the same direction and support the achievement of climate neutrality. So in practice, what does that mean in the field of energy policy? Well, we have, over the last year, under the leadership of Commissioner Kadri Simpson, adopted a number of strategies and plans that put the energy policy instruments at the support of the European Green Deal. And we have adopted a strategy on energy system integration, which is an absolutely central element. To get there, we need a more integrated, more flexible, more circular energy system, integrating all the different types of new technologies that are needed in the most efficient way possible. This will require us to electrify at a much higher level than we've done before, in particular end-use sectors, really building on the renewable energy system already available, and of course solar is an important part of that. The idea is that by 2030, the share of renewable energy in the overall electricity mix would double to 65% or more, and 84% by 2050. The energy system integration strategy was accompanied by a hydrogen strategy, underlining the need for this energy carrier to help integrate the energy system and to decarbonize the hard-to-abate sectors, which gives priority to renewable hydrogen produced using either wind or solar in particular. Together with these strategies, we also adopted a Renovation Wave strategy, aiming to double the rate of renovation in Europe by 2030, so as to lower the overall energy consumption, become more energy efficient. And of course, the integration of renewables into the building mass, such as solar rooftop panels, is really one of the key principles of the Renovation Wave strategy. In the autumn, we also adopted an offshore renewable energy strategy, stressing the enormous potential for offshore and the need to scale up significantly compared to where we are now in the field of offshore. And of course, looking at offshore wind as the most developed, the furthest developed part of these technologies, but also looking to the newer, to the ones where there's need for more innovation and more investment, such as floating solar panels, which we do see in some of our member states as well. All of these strategies essentially has set a basis, has set a framework of principles and direction, and that will be followed up now with the Fit for 55 package. And as you will know, Council and Parliament, our co-legislators, agreed to the climate law just a few weeks ago, and our heads of state and government have confirmed the 55% as the target for 2030. So we need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030. In order to do that, we do need to act in all sectors, as I said at the beginning, but the energy sector really has a central role because 75% of our emissions come from either energy production or energy consumption. So we will be presenting our Fit for 55 package this summer, and it will be a number of different elements. But let me just say a few words about what does it mean in the energy sector and what does it mean for solar in particular. In the energy sector, we will be focusing on energy efficiency and on the scaling up of renewable energy. Our climate target plan has made it clear that in order to become climate neutral in 2050, but first in order to reduce our emissions by 55% in 2030, we are going to need to increase the share of renewable energy and renewable electricity in our system. We're going to need somewhere around 38 to 40% by 2030. So quite an important increase compared to where we are now. And it's clear here that solar power will play a very important role. We need to scale up the solar sector across Europe. Annual investments related to energy production will have to increase by around 350 billion a year compared to what we've seen over the last decade. This will, of course, mainly come from the private sector, but there is also a strong role for public spending as well. It's important for solar or solar has a key role here, primarily in the residential sector, which would be estimated at around 100 billion, but also in the supply sector, which would be estimated around 60 billion. And to give you some concrete examples where investments in solar could play an important role of interest to industry, of course, is, as I've mentioned, the renovation of the building stock and the integration of renewable energy there, solar rooftop panels, for example. A second example is in the energy system integration, where we need more infrastructure, we need more battery production, storage facilities, and renewable hydrogen and electrolyzers linked to renewable energy generation. This brings me to the recovery and resilience plans and the important investment opportunities that these plans represent. Of course, the Green Deal, the changes to the energy sector, was all part of the Commission's work plan from the beginning, as I set out under the European Green Deal. But the COVID-19 pandemic and the crisis that it has brought has really changed quite a lot in terms of the perspective. And what we have done in the Commission is to put together a budgetary boost to help the recovery, to help build resilience, the next generation EU recovery instrument that was presented last year. It's clear that in the investment, in the recovery, in the rebuilding, and in the resilience, we need to align with and support our European Green Deal objectives and our climate objectives. And these objectives can really be a driving force of the European economic recovery and growth in that context. And so it was decided that out of the recovery plans and out of the investments under the recovery plans, we should invest at least 37% into climate-related reforms and investments. And it's clear that in order to simply achieve 37% of these very significant investments, we are going to need to invest in the energy sector, and in particular in the energy efficiency sector and in the renewable energy sector, again, both of which are sectors and types of investment where there is a strong role for solar. Let me give you two examples of the flagships that we have proposed from the European Commission that are directly relevant in relation to solar power. The first is the so-called Power Up flagship, which focuses on clean technologies, renewables, and has a goal of producing and integrating almost 40% of the 500 gigawatt of renewable power generation that will be needed by 2030. And here, of course, solar technology should be largely represented in the national recovery and resilience plans. In addition to that, I've mentioned hydrogen, renewable hydrogen, and the idea here would also be that there will be investments into production and transport of up to 1 million tons of renewable hydrogen produced by solar and wind across the European Union by 2025. The second flagship that I want to mention in this context links into the Renovation Wave. It's the Renovate flagship, which really aims at making in our built environment more energy efficient, including, once again, the integration of renewables into the buildings, such as solar roof installations. It is for each European member state to draw up a national recovery and resilience plans. We have received many of them already and are currently working through them so as to bring them to convert them into legally binding acts, hoping that the actual investments can then get underway as soon as possible with member states and under their national plans. Let me turn to the industrial strategy that was adopted just last week and which also is highly relevant in the renewable energy sector, but also with a particular focus on solar, and which really aims to further boost the recovery and enhance our open strategic autonomy across Europe. And again, in this context, the energy sector is really at the center. We include in the updated industrial strategy an analysis of the critical supply chains for the energy sector, highlighting the need for critical raw and processed materials, which are really essential for our energy security, but also for the success of the clean energy transition and for our competitiveness and supply chain security. So we have identified potential dependencies, including in the area of renewables, and the need for storage, and of course, the need for cybersecurity in our energy system. In the updated industrial strategy, we also emphasize that increased investment in renewable energy sources, storage, grids, interconnections, and industrial transformation will be needed for sustainable competitiveness. And we emphasize that the Commission will work with member states to increase their ambition in the renewable energy sector, and of course work with industry to strengthen our competitiveness. There's a direct reference to renewable energy and the Renewable Energy Directive, which is under revision as part of the Fit for 55 package, and the need to support the uptake of corporate renewable PPAs. The strategy also welcomes the scale-up of manufacturing in Europe of these renewable technologies. Solar photovoltaic panels is a particular example where we see an increased effort to scale up and to rebuild European manufacturing capacity, and an industry-led European solar initiative of direct relevance to the discussions today. And then we're also working on eco-design measures for solar panels, including possible requirements of carbon footprints. So a lot of activity, a lot going on, and a very clear direction based on our assessment in the Climate Target Plan, where we see that solar deployment should more than double by 2030 compared to today, and as I said, triple by 2050 in order to allow us to become climate neutral by 2050. As we emerged from the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, the clean energy transition will be more important than ever, and scaling up solar will have a massive contribution to make to this process and to the green energy transition. So I very much hope that all of you also feel fit for the challenges ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dieter. You mentioned a lot of different elements, and all of them would be worthwhile covering separately in different sessions. I would like to deep dive now with my distinguished panels on some of the elements which are particularly relevant for businesses. But maybe just before you're leaving us, Dieter, just one thing, because I mean, we will be very happy discussing all of these elements further with you, and SolarPower Europe has identified a number of areas where it's worthwhile, looking into. One thing is the ambition. We are asking for 45% of renewables in the energy system, and you just mentioned 38 to 40%, and we would be very happy to show you also how beneficial that would be to businesses, because they need huge volumes of renewables, but that's probably also something we can discuss further later. Thanks very much for joining us. I'm now turning to my distinguished panel, and I would like to introduce my panel very quickly. We have half an hour left to discuss some of the elements Dieter was just mentioning. So I will be posing very short questions, and I'm inviting you to also be as concise as possible. But first of all, we have Jutta Paulus, a member of the European Parliament for the Greens. We have Anne Mettler, Vice President Europe for Breakthrough Energy. And we have Christoph Sutter, Head of Renewables Division at Axpo. And I already said in the beginning, very sorry for not being that much gender balanced today, Christoph. Christoph, I'm starting with you. With increased 2030 targets, and we're still looking at what these targets will be. Hopefully it will be more towards 45%, what we are asking. What can what does corporate sourcing mean to reach these increased ambitions, and how can we support member states that they are putting a little bit more effort into helping businesses with corporate sourcing in order to play their part in the energy transition?
Hello, everybody. Thanks for Burga. We see a very strong uptake regarding corporate sourcing for renewable electricity. You see, we from Axpo, we're active in 30 countries around Europe, and we have been signing PPAs for many years. But this was kind of smaller volumes, and now last year, 8 gigawatt additional PPAs from corporates were signed throughout Europe. And this is more than double what we have seen the year before in 2019. So it's really on a very strong growth path, this corporate PPA, power purchase agreements. So the way to directly source corporates from renewable energy sources, wind, and mainly picking up now PV. So this is really strong, and we see also a shift in the countries. In the recent years, we have seen a lot of things happening in the Nordics, but now, for example, last year, more than half of all the volume was signed in Spain only. So it's depending on the countries, and my own country, Switzerland, have the first PPA, and I think it's still the only one, and we signed the PPA for this power plant here in my background. It will be the highest PV installation, large PV installations in Europe on 2,500 meters in the Swiss Alps. So I think it's really going on. Now to your second part of the question, what could be done to boost that even more? I think actually as a country, you don't need to do much. You have to allow for corporate PPAs and not hinder them too much, and that will go. But the problem is, the major problem we see is somewhere else. It's if we are very successful, and we are successful building PV, then there will be a problem that everybody is kind of producing in the same few hours of the day. And so we have a peak supply, and we see this already now happening in Spain. And during these hours, prices will crash in the electricity market. And so if we really want to continue to grow PV at the pace we are for many years to come, and we need to do that, so we have to make sure we can shift, on one hand, production patterns, but also consumption patterns. And when it comes to production patterns, I think the political frameworks we should set in a manner that incentivize people to produce in kind of different patterns, not just the standard PV pattern. For example, by using hybrid or constructing hybrid systems where you have PV combined with batteries. I think there the policy people are needed to set incentives right.
Do you see, for example, already a couple of member states which are going in the right direction in what they are putting, not just in their national energy and climate plans, but really putting on the ground?
Yes, for example, in Germany, we already have, they call it innovation auctions. And it means that you can go with your PV plant to an auction, but they only allow plants that have this hybrid system. So you have to go to the auction with PV and batteries in combination. So this is a very concrete example of Germany, how they do it. And there are other examples as well.
Okay, Germany. I'm turning to you, Jutta, as you are from Germany. Dieter, in her speech, mentioned the huge potential solar rooftops have, also in the commercial industrial sector, so not just for small prosumers, but also for bigger businesses. What can we do? What can the European Parliament do? What can maybe also Germany do in order to unleash that potential and incentivize businesses to use the roofs which otherwise would be unused?
Yes, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for organizing this important event, because I believe that without businesses, without industry really tapping into the potential of renewable energy, not able to reach our climate targets. And when it comes to rooftop, I would also like to throw in the word facade, because every building has a roof, but usually every building has a lot more facades than roof. And there we have a lot of potential, and we also have a potential of double added value. For example, there are already innovative businesses that fabricate panels which have solar panels on the outside. So in your building, you can at the same time provide harvesting energy to this newly renovated building. And I think these are the solutions that we need to. When it comes to business and industry, I think the default option for many years was you build your business, build your industry appliance, and then you look, where does my energy come from? And you only choose the most cost-efficient option. I think we have to shift this paradigm and to say the default option is, how much energy can I generate on my own grounds with my own building, and then look at how much energy do I have to acquire from other sources. So tap your own potential first, and then look, where do I buy the rest of this potential? I think what
Jutta,
is that we should address the sector specifically, that we should address the commercial, the business sector with a specific article, which it doesn't have right now.
Thanks very much for that. We have been losing you a little bit, but I think we got your messages. Do you think that we should make it mandatory to use the space we have on solar roofs or on roofs for solar?
I think that we should use the space because we are seeing more and more conflicts around land. Land is a very scarce resource in Europe. I mean, it's differently in the United States, the Sahara, let's say. But in Europe, we have agriculture, we have urban spaces, we need space for nature. And so land is a resource. You have to use it very efficiently, be it by agri-PV, where you have, or be it by using already used spaces where you have buildings. Every building has a roof, every building has facades. And now that solar panels have become so incredibly cheap, you could just say, okay, maybe it's not the optimal direction, but still I can harvest some of the energy in the morning or in the afternoon and just support my system. But we have to make it mandatory because else it won't function. And we have to make it easy because no business owner wants to have a hassle with bureaucracy. They want to have an easygoing, they don't want to shoulder more administrative burdens. So I think the prudent thing would be having sort of an aggregator where you, like a one-stop shop, you go there, you say, hey, I want to do this and that, can you help me? And then you do one signature and you're finished with everything. I think that's what especially the small and medium enterprises need.
Thanks, Jutta. We lost you here and there, but we got the keywords. And one of the last things you also mentioned was a reference to the US. And Breakthrough Energy has its origins in the US. You're representing innovative businesses, or you're investing in innovative businesses. What is it from your perspective, if you could just react to Christoph and to Jutta, to engage, what does it need to engage businesses in this transformation? And is there something we can also learn from the US?
Thank you, Walburga, and great to be with you today. I mean, yes, businesses are obviously very important in this transformation and in the energy transition that we are talking about here today, because, I mean, the innovation will come out of companies. And also, we heard from Christoph that companies and businesses play an important role in generating demand for these technologies that we are discussing here today. So businesses have a crucial role to play. I always like to cite this very important insight from the International Energy Agency that 50% of the emission reductions that will be needed to meet our targets, the 2050 targets, will have to come from technologies that have not yet been commercialized. So we really need to think about how do the public and the private sector interact to make sure that these technologies are essentially on a growth curve, because otherwise we will not meet the targets, as I said before. And here I would like us to reflect a little bit about sort of the scale-up phase of these clean technologies, because it is here where oftentimes it can take decades for these clean technologies to become cost competitive with their fossil fuel incumbent competitors. And solar, as you well know, underwent exactly such a trajectory. It took a long time. So here, I mean, we're doing a lot of work essentially around building sort of new public-private partnerships that can de-risk these technologies at this very critical stage. And for that, I would say that we need to work together in a way where, you know, these partnerships become about much more than just sort of the financial bottom line. And we really look much more at the climate impact rather than just a financial impact. And here for that, we need patient, risk-tolerant capital, lots of it. And this is precisely where we also think, in addition to the public and the private sector, that philanthropy has a role to play, because we really, as I said, we have a massive capital requirement, so philanthropy can and should play a role here. Now, you asked about the United States, and as you rightly say, Breakthrough Energy is headquartered in the United States. So I have thought a lot about, what are maybe some of the differences. And for me, it was very surprising that in the last 4 years where President Trump was in power, that despite a very hostile sort of policy environment, a lot of investment, VC investment into clean technologies actually went into the United States. So this was really interesting, and it leads me to believe and to question really what role the wider innovation ecosystem plays. Yes, conducive public policy is very important, but so is the wider sort of environment in which businesses operate and innovate. So I just wanted to throw that in there. But the last thing I'll say, what is really maybe a pronounced difference between Europe and the United States, I find. In Europe, we think a lot about sort of the supply of innovation. And we actually do quite well when it comes to VC investment into startups. So in seed investment, where almost a quarter of global investment comes to European startups. So we're doing well. It's in the scale-up phase, as I said before, where we run into problems. But this is precisely why we need to focus on demand, not just developing the clean technologies, but then also generating the demand. Christoph has already spoken about it, but if you ask me what's a real difference, this is it. The US is very focused not just on the supply of innovation, but then generating also the necessary demand for innovation. And this is where I think maybe in Europe we can actually should occasionally look across the Atlantic on how that is done, because you can build buyers clubs. There are different ways of doing that. And this is where some of our discussions should be going.
Thanks, Anne. Now let's hope that the industrial strategy, which has just been presented, is giving us some of the answers to the elements you just raised and giving us the framework we need in Europe in order to be innovative and bring these innovations also on the ground, making them successful for job creation and growth in general in Europe. But to just continue on innovation, because it is very, very important indeed, as you mentioned, to be innovative. So it's not just about the price of energy businesses are paying or the framework they have for the business. It's also about innovation. If we would look into a crystal ball and if we would have the framework you were just pointing out in Europe, what are the innovations that are needed and which we might also see in the next couple of years, which help European businesses to be globally competitive when it comes to energy?
So I think one thing I should say is I don't want to go into specific technologies, but what I will say and what I would encourage Europe to do is really to focus, sort of keep its eyes on the next generation of clean technologies. I sometimes find we get very bogged down on one or two technologies that become sort of what I would call the flavor of the month, and everything is about these technologies. When in reality, I think we need sort of a portfolio approach, because I already spoke that these are very high-risk ventures. So it's very difficult to say upfront what technology will end up the winner. So a portfolio approach where we look at technologies also from different levels of maturity, because not all technologies are at the same level of maturity, and then sort of have customized almost a policy and financial arrangement for these technologies in the various maturity phases. The second thing I would say is we tend to spend a lot of time on sort of discussions about transition technologies. So here we're talking much more about incremental innovation rather than breakthrough innovation. And while that in the short term, maybe that it makes things more easier because you're not really looking for the disruptive change, I think Europe needs to have a discussion about how we can leapfrog to a next generation of clean technologies that are truly sort of net zero and that don't just try to sort of repurpose fossil fuels as we know them today. So I think that the element of leapfrogging to a next generation of technologies would be very important because, as I already said, 50% of the emission reductions will have to come from technologies that are not yet commercialized. So this is really a tall order. But I also, please allow me to say, technology is not everything. And I now have the privilege of speaking to investors quite regularly. And what I want to say is that when they look to Europe, I think that the sort of there's no doubt that they believe Europe can be really a world-class when it comes to developing new technologies. And no one doubts that, and Europe has proven that time and again. But where I think there is some concern is perhaps, I spoke about the wider ecosystem. Markets still tend to be quite fragmented. It continues to be very challenging to grow a business from one country to the next. And it continues to be really difficult to get sort of the growth equity for the mid-cap companies that they need. So I would encourage us to think a little bit about this, and even go so far to look at the company level itself, because I know from the investors that sometimes they go to companies and they have really good technologies. But there was a discussion the other day about a company in Europe that after a decade, they had only grown to 12 employees. I mean, is this the kind of company that it will really be sort of on a path towards exponential international growth? You know, we doubt it. So my point is technology, yes, but so the wider ecosystem, and even going down to the company dynamics. This is what I would encourage.
Thanks very much, Anne. And I couldn't agree more when you say that technologically we are leaders in many ways in Europe. And this is very much true also for the PV sector, where we have been leading technology in Europe globally. But then the question is, how are we sustaining the ecosystem? How are we making sure that the industry is producing in Europe and is also creating jobs and growth in Europe? That's what we discussed, by the way, in one of our previous sessions here today in the Solar for Manufacturing, because we are a true believer that it is possible to support the value chain in Europe and to bring the technologies where we are so good at and take it to the ground and scale it up. I would still be very curious, and that's the last question, very quick, what the technologies are you were thinking of when you said about leapfrogging and not just continuing what we need for the transition. So what are you looking at? One or two examples.
Well, I mean, in Europe, specifically renewable hydrogen. So we have very high hopes that Europe will be a global leader in renewable hydrogen, and that Europe is very well positioned to be a global leader in renewable hydrogen. So this is definitely one area that we are looking at, and really in all of sort of the industrial applications. So whether that's cement, whether that's steel, that's all of great interest to us, because Europe de facto has a very long tradition sort of in deep tech, in engineering and science, and so we are very, very uniquely positioned in the world. But renewable hydrogen, as you know, is something where we believe Europe can and will be leading.
We have something in common there. Thanks, Anne. I'm turning to you, Christoph. Staying with the topic of innovations, what are the innovations you would like to see for your businesses, but also for your customers, which are businesses? And what are you investing in when it comes to innovation?
I would quickly focus on three elements when it comes to innovation. First is a business model innovation. What we see from lots of our clients, industrial clients, but also small and medium-sized enterprises, they want 24/7 reliable, sustainable energy. And so we more and more now try to package things together, bringing different skills in. So, for example, that this industrial client gets a PV plant on their roofs. We add their off-site PV installation or wind installation somewhere in the region. And so you have an on-site PPA, you have an off-site PPA, and then you wrap everything with some trading expertise that is adding the missing elements of the electricity for this 24/7 supply with green energy from the market. And you deliver this package full-fledged to the client. This is yeah, this I would call a kind of a business model innovation, and we see more and more demand for this type of products in the market. Then when it comes more to technology, I think we invest very, very strategically now in batteries. As mentioned before, I think it will be very important to shift this PV patterns to kind of more flattening out the PV patterns to supply energy that has a different pattern than just the standard PV profile. So we combine more and more PV plants, large PV plants with large battery systems. And the third point, like Anne mentioned, I also totally with you, Anne and Burka, I think hydrogen will be enormously important in the years and decades to come in Europe. And it's very much, as you mentioned, and it's about building an ecosystem. It's not just a tech pieces. Yes, we have to work on that. Yes, we have to bring costs down on electrolyzers, for example, but it's a whole ecosystem we need to create. And we're building up now very dedicated teams that do something which we call serious experiments in hydrogen. So we really want to see where the interesting things happening, and we just do pilot projects there. And for example, in Switzerland, we help now together with partners to build up an ecosystem for hydrogen-powered trucks. So it needs everything. It needs the trucks, it needs the stations where they can refill, and obviously it needs green hydrogen, and we now start producing green hydrogen by using existing, sometimes 100-year-old run-of-river hydro plants. That's the Swiss system, but I think in other countries it will be PV. So, but it's all about focusing, getting the ecosystem up and running.
Thanks a lot, Christoph. Jutta, would you want to react to any of the two other interventions on innovation? What is your take? Are we doing enough in Europe? How can we
unmute myself? Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so. I think we should, when it comes to the market development, if anyone had told you 5 years ago that solar energy, that said you're mad. But we should also not overestimate innovation, because harvest renewable energy. We know how to turn it into hydrogen and subsequently into synthetic fuels, which we'll need in order to decarbonize. And we should not waste time waiting for innovation. Of course, we need innovation. I don't think that it's the 50% that Anne has been talking about, because I had read the interview with Bill Gates, but honestly, the scientists I have spoken to have told me differently. So, of course, encourage innovation. I think, for example, the innovation auctions on solar plus storage are a very good idea and should be duplicated all over Europe. But don't rely on innovation alone. Push forward the solutions that we have today, because we don't have time indefinitely to solve the climate crisis. On the contrary, time is running out ever and ever faster. So please take the solutions which we have now, encourage innovation, but don't let this hinder us in doing what can be done today.
We don't have time indefinitely. Unfortunately, that's also true for our session. We're coming to an end. I would like to hear from you in a very last round what it is you absolutely want to see in Ditte's Fit for 55 package. What is the single most important thing there needs to be in order to drive businesses, in order to spur the energy transition? Anne, can I start with you?
With me?
Yes.
Good. So first, you please allow me to say to Jutta that these are not the data I cited comes from the International Energy Agency. So that I think is a reputed source. On your question, more than anything, I think Fit for 55 must really make the EU sort of fit for climate innovation. And I say that, yes, it's not everything, but the current technologies will not get us to net zero. And this is why we need to focus on this. So accelerate the innovation cycle. For wind and solar, it took 25 to 30 years. We don't have that. I agree with Jutta. So accelerate the innovation cycle. This is what I would like to see in Fit for 55. Make this the decade for innovation.
The decade for innovation. Christoph, what is it that you need in the Fit for 55 most importantly?
In addition to that, I think we need really to see a robust regulatory framework for the necessary development of renewable energy, in particular for PV. We are only at the beginning. We need much more of this installed in Europe. And I think in particular, it is essential to create incentives for companies to shift electricity consumption patterns and also production patterns. And I think it would be great to incentivize companies to build hybrid systems consisting of PV and batteries.
Thanks, Christoph. And Jutta, you hear both, you hear Anne and you hear Christoph. Will that be one of the two priorities you will be pushing for in the European Parliament, or is it something else? And I hope your internet
I will be pushing for sector integration because, sorry.
Go ahead.
I will be pushing. The old system was based on the assumption that electricity is something very, very precious, which has to be produced from primary energy like coal or oil or gas or nuclear, and then you have this precious energy which can be used for any application almost. Now we must turn the system the other way around, because electricity will be our primary energy when we are harvesting renewable energy. So we have to take off the levies, the taxes, the surcharges, the whatever we have put on electricity in order to make it the most efficient way to use it. And we have to put all these levies, surcharges, and so forth on carbon fuels. And that will bring us forward in sector integration, because when you can very easily switch the sector from power sector to heating and cooling, or to transport, or to storage, then you can truly unleash the potential of a renewable society.
Thanks, Jutta. That was a very nice closing statement. Electrification for everyone, for businesses. That is indeed very much what we are also pushing for. Thanks to the distinguished panel. Thanks to you, Jutta, Anne, and Christoph. It was really a pleasure discussing with you. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for you to join us. And I would like to hand back to Aurélie, who will tell you more what is happening still today throughout our SolarPower Summit.
Thank you very much, Valborga, for this very exciting session. And thank you, obviously, to our panelists. I think it is then a no-brainer that if you want to drive sustainable change, you need to make sure that our business can grasp the potential of renewables to unlock the potential of corporate renewable energy procurement. If you're interested to know more, obviously do not hesitate to go visit our resource platform, which is a joint initiative from SolarPower Europe, Wind Europe, RE100 and WBCSD, in order to promote the uptake of corporate renewable sourcing in Europe, and obviously to make it a centerpiece of the upcoming Fit for 55 package. Now, for our wellness stress-busting break, which is coming right after now, our health coach, Lidzi, has prepared a bit of stretching in order to help you relax and relieve the pressure. And of course, then I hope you will come to us fully prepared for the two last sessions of the day. Enjoy your break and see you back at 2:45.